Good morning, everybody, and welcome into our latest TDR Traded Black podcast. I'm your host, Shdales. We got a big one here this morning. You obviously all heard the news yesterday involving rescheduling and the delay that's happening. Is this a good or a bad thing? How should we be interpreting this? We're going to bring on one of the best cannabis attorneys in the country. Eric Berlin from Dentons will join us again in just a moment. Plus, we'll dive into the JD Vance Joe Rogan podcast because both psychedelics and cannabis was brought up. So we get the takeaways from our very own AV pertaining to it. So let's welcome him in first. Anthony Varell here on a Friday morning. This is a dandy one. Fridays are usually chill, but based off of yesterday afternoon's news and what we heard and saw, big one obviously to bring on somebody like Eric. But before we bring him in, how did you interpret and what did you think of this when you first glanced at it?
So I saw the article hit on Tom's Twitter, Marijuana Moment, and read the headline, and I was like, oh no, what now? Clicked the article, read the article, and then as soon as I got to the part where it was like, well, but the hearing is still taking place on December 2nd. There's just going to be no testimony until the new year. It's like, well, this isn't really a delay. This is more so a procedural thing with the ALJ wanting to have the actual participants establish standing.
Yeah.
It's sure semantics. Great headline. I'm sure that article did numbers in performance. I greatly appreciate Tom for reporting the news in a timely manner, and it gave us a lot of talking points for conversation, but I really don't see it as a quote unquote delay.
Yeah, agreed.
More so just going through the motions and establishing the angles that we need to get this done and for this to matter.
Yeah. Jungle Job, I think you hit it right on. Hello, friends. I'm excited to hear what Eric has to say. The delay seems positive in my opinion. I think it does, but to find out more whether it is or not, let's welcome in Eric Berlin from Dentons back to the podcast. Happy Friday. No time to sleep in this cannabis industry. Never a dull moment, isn't there?
No, there's never a dull moment. Listening to your intro music was, like my relaxing period for the week. So thank you for that. No, greetings. Happy Friday.
Can you bring that up here in the background?
Yeah. From where we sit, news is good, right? Things at times have seemed like they've moved slowly in terms of cannabis reform. So
yes,
it's always, news is always welcome.
Yeah. So like I said, off the top, ALJ judge calls into question the standing of participants involved in this hearing. So straight to the point. How should we digest all this? Is this a good thing?
Well, I think it's, first of all, what you just said is that the questioning the designated participant standing is a good thing, in my opinion.
Okay.
The fact that we're having a sort of procedural hearing in December and then substantive hearings in the first quarter of next year, I see as neutral. I'm entirely unsurprised by that. I view that as really the likely situation, and I thought getting the hearing done in December was possible but unlikely.
Yeah.
I can. I'm happy to just share some thoughts about what that order means, if you like.
I'd love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me just start with the procedure itself. That what happens here is that the DEA administrator, Ann Milgram in this case, makes the determination as to whether or not she's going to assign an ALJ, an administrative law judge. And in this case, she did. And that's appropriate and expected. And let me just, for a moment, give you all a little bit of education as to the actual administrative law judge, and we lawyers refer to that as ALJ. So John Mulrooney is the chief administrative law judge for the DEA within the DOJ. Remember, the DEA sits within the DOJ, but you actually have administrative law judges that are part of the DOJ. He has been in that position now for 15 years.
Okay.
And prior to that, he was an ALJ for the Social Security Administration for 8 years. He served as the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate in 1985 through 1990, and then was a New York assistant district attorney for 4 years. He joined the DOJ in 1995. So he is very experienced as an ALJ. This is by no means, first of all, I'd heard the rumor that Ann Milgram was going to, do this herself, which didn't seem likely to me. I mean, I have no reason why that would happen. And so the fact that she assigned an ALJ, the fact that it's someone with a strong reputation and a lot of experience is also not surprising, because I think the government views this as significant. His experience and the order itself indicate that he will run a tight proceeding. It would also be safe to say, assumptions are dangerous, but I think it would be safe to say that Administrative Law Judge John Mulrooney has never used cannabis and is probably does not have favorable views of it. Although I'll just say this, you never know who has been influenced by a family member and a family member's positive medical use. So I don't mean to prejudge that, but we're talking about someone who has a lot of experience. And then let's turn to the designated participant and what happened there. Basically, the DEA made a determination as to who could be so-called designated participants in the hearing.
Okay.
In terms of that list that was transmitted, it did not say anywhere this, but it's very clear if you look at the list and know those parties that numbers 1 through 10 are pro rescheduling, or perhaps pro descheduling, while numbers 11 through 25 are against rescheduling.
Okay.
We'll be there to argue that all sorts of mistakes were made by the FDA, and cannabis, marijuana, as it's defined under the Controlled Substances Act, should remain under Schedule 1. Most of those in the latter category well, I'm searching for words and I apologize, would be viewed by the cannabis industry as horrible.
Yeah.
I was expecting that kind of response. I knew you were thinking for the words, but it was just lay it out, because I know where you're going with
it.
I
mean, I want to be honest here. So you take the organization like Civil, which is Cannabis Industry Victims Educating Litigators, right? And their representative is David Evans, who is an attorney. And you just go to their page, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but it's like, dear colleagues, the marijuana industry victimizes people and causes massive damage. We ask you to join in this vital project to make the marijuana industry legally accountable to their victims and our country. And as you would expect, it has this line: today's marijuana products can be high in potency and can reach 99% THC. Get ready. These products can be very destructive and cause addiction, mental illness, violence, crime, DUIs, and many health and social problems. It would fit right into Reefer Madness if it just had, something directly racial included.
Absolutely. But Eric, despite what you just recited, which some of it might be true to a certain extent, isn't the point of this exercise to prove who would be harmed by rescheduling, which in its purest form, rescheduling doesn't increase accessibility. So how could you prove that it is going to harm any party further?
So that's a perfect segue to the next point.
Okay.
And I thank you for that, which is that, fortunately, in my opinion, the order indicates that the ALJ may cut some of the designated participants.
Okay.
And that I thought was particularly interesting. I mean, the ALJ noted that he did not receive any of the documentation about the so-called designated participants. I'm going to use that word in capital letters. And nor did he receive any indication, he specifically said this, as to how they would be adversely affected or aggrieved, I'm quoting there, by the proposed regulation change. or he said any other helpful information, right?
How does that happen? How are these
Yeah.
parties not prepared?
Well, I think what he's saying is that the information was not transmitted to him.
Okay.
And in response to that, he's saying he needs to understand who really is an interested party. And by that, they have to demonstrate, and he has this in the order, that he, she, it would be, quote, adversely affected or aggrieved by the proposed scheduling action. And there he cites 21 CFR section 1300.1b. I mentioned the section, I rarely do that, but folks can go look it up and they can see it has specific language about being adversely affected or aggrieved. And what he said is, and I'm going to quote this because it's such an important sentence.
Yeah.
Thus, just as the agency carries the burden of proof to prevail on its proposed rulemaking, which that clause in and of itself is important.
Yeah.
Those among the designated participants seeking administrative participation in this hearing must establish that they have made timely application and are eligible as, quote, an interested person. So the ALJ then requested that each designated participant by a date specific, middle of this, well, we're in the new month, middle of this month, provide very specific information in a pleading, in a filing, including in that notice why, how the DP, the designated participant, would be sufficiently, quote, adversely affected or aggrieved by the proposed scheduling action to qualify as an interested person under this regulation. So first of all, they're handing it over to the ALJ, and the ALJ setting a hearing, and the ALJ requesting this information. There's nothing wrong or inappropriate about that, in my opinion. And in fact, I think it is entirely appropriate that the ALJ question the part, and that is not just appropriate. I mean, it's fully authorized by the law that the ALJ question whether the participants have standing in the sense that they are interested persons, which is identified as adversely affected or aggrieved. And you started on the subject, but like, I don't understand how an organization, that is, and any organization, whether it's one that just generally advocates or it's a litigation fund or anything like that, is adversely affected or aggrieved by the rescheduling. To be clear, the rescheduling would not legalize state programs. It would not legalize cannabis in its general form. And the important thing it would do would lead to greater research so that we could determine the veracity of some of the statements that are made, right?
Well, some of these statements.
Listen, let me say this. I think it's really important that folks recognize that while marijuana has been tested a ton, there's still more that can be done. And there's more that can be done to hopefully unleash the power of the plant to develop more focused medicines, but also for us to understand if and the extent of any harms. And there has been some negative research that came out recently. I mean, I hate to be bummed, but I just want us to all be sober on this. One showing, and it's more of a rat study, high THC in adolescents of shrinking cortex. We also saw some DNA change, but let me say this: we don't know whether it's material or not, right? I mean, lots of things. Exercise causes DNA change, but I'm just saying, like that is the change enables the scientific research to then determine better how to regulate this substance.
Well,
it doesn't cause any of the harms that any of these folks are claiming. I mean, they're claiming, it's going to lead to an increase in DUIs. Well, I mean, that's just not true. How would rescheduling to 3 lead to an increase in DUIs, right? I mean, in the same way that like moving steroids into 3 doesn't mean that like everyone's out there using steroids.
Correct.
And by the way, as more and more folks used anabolic steroids, they saw that there were real harms attached to it, and folks can decide for themselves.
So is there a potential scenario, which obviously I don't think this is likely, but we get to November 12th and the ALJs establish that none of these 25 groups have standing to participate in the hearing?
Yes, I'm saying yes without myself passing any judgment on any of the.
So that is a possibility. Okay.
Yep.
So this could move quickly then.
I mean, I think so. I don't know that that's going to happen. I'm not sitting here suggesting that I think that's going to happen. I mean, I think that it could, and in many ways, I think that it should. But I'm not saying that it necessarily will. But let me go. Oh, go ahead, please.
When I see this, though, like when you see a lot of these allegations coming from parties, like this actually could be beneficial for them if this was an election you're trying to sway some obviously voters. But this is the court of law. And when the judge looks at this right now, as to your point, like this is not legalizing cannabis recreationally. This is about rescheduling, where proper research is basically going to be the focal point for rescheduling. So when a judge looks at this, the way it's presented in a certain way, that's where I think, I think at the end of the day, a judge would look at this and move quickly on this because it really has no merit.
So I think that's true, although I think there'll be kind of a substantial record, because he's invited folks to file briefs at that time as well. And he may want to consider the briefs. He may want to consider additional data. So let me say the different possibilities.
Yep.
It's possible that between November and the start of the new year, that the ALJ determines that none of these parties are sufficiently interested, have sufficient, have met that standard. That's possible, and in that case, theoretically, there'd be no hearing. Without suggesting one way or another what should happen, if the ALJ determines that at least some of the parties have standing, he has set out how the hearing will unfold. And it does not at all look like a situation where this is just going to go on indefinitely. He's put in strict limits on time, which I think are positive. He's been, he recognizes this is something of great interest and has even addressed that point, right? I mean, I think that's very orderly to suggest if you're not a designated participant, don't show up. We'll have a live stream for you, but we're not interested in this becoming a circus with so many people there. I mean, that's basically what he said. Well, it's not basically what he said. It's what he said, that other than the government and folks who are meeting that standard, those are the only folks who are going to be there.
Yeah.
And he's also expecting each of those to present testimony of not more than one witness.
Yeah.
So that to me seems very orderly. And so if we're looking at this judge, I would say two things. One, I do believe that he understands the points that we were just making. I mean, you're looking at someone who is very experienced, and he will not be swayed thinking like moving to Schedule 3 is like legalizing and all of these things happen. I'm fairly assured that he understands that. And from looking at from the order, which I've read a few times, it looks very orderly. And so I don't see this as a delay at all. I understand that some folks were hopeful that things would just move in December and we'd even have a final rule by the start of the year. And having spent a few decades of my career in litigation, things generally do not go that fast when it gets into hearings. And in some ways, I'm glad to see that he's doing it in an orderly way. And as I think I've even said on this podcast, the notion of that you're going to get enough people with good schedules through the holidays it generally doesn't happen. And yeah, I mean, I've been on cases where it's like, this is really important, we need to go forward, but like everyone's entitled to their time off. So the fact that it substantively is moving into January or February, I think is very positive. And I think it's very positive that he is going to take a good hard look to make a determination as to which parties actually are meet the standard. Now, might some parties try to sue? I don't know. I'm just saying that's theoretically possible, that a party will sue claiming that that party is meets the standard, and they might go to court to get relief. That probably is a fool's errand. I mean, that's a tough standard to overturn the ALJ, particularly when we're looking at parties that, at least on the con side, it's pretty speculative as to what the standing is. I mean, but I don't view the order as something overly negative. Okay. I view the parties that are listed on balance as negative and concerning, and I would hope, you know, many of them, if they, I mean, they need evidence, and they need evidence that has not been already submitted to the government, and they need to first of all show why it's not just they think it's a bad thing, but why they themselves would be adversely affected.
So Eric, we went through, I mean, this stems from the executive branch 2 years ago ordering the HHS to then deem their report. Then we took it a step further, and then the OLC came out and gave their opinion, legitimizing the process. The DEA has said that the two-step process that the OLC legitimized was legitimate. This is now going to ALJ. If the ALJ also deems that cannabis should be rescheduled, how can you further litigate this or litigate against this moving forward? Right.
So I hesitate because I don't necessarily want to, you know, figure out my opponent's strategy. It's for them to do. But is it possible? But I mean, but let me just give a broad way of suggesting, which is, there are certain parties that, you know, may just litigate this as far as they go. I mean, basically, they have the money and they're going to litigate it until there's no next step to take procedurally. And so, let's say a final rule is issued.
Yep.
Let's say a final, you know, let's just say a final, please, like, don't take this as a date, it's a hypothetical. Final rule is issued in March. Okay. And it's to reschedule to 3. And so that party might bring an action at that time. Number one, saying the hearing was flawed because they were improperly excluded. And regardless, here are all the things that were wrong, that happened wrong. And I agree. I mean, it's seems like a very difficult argument to me, because I don't see anything wrong that the government's done so far. But I mean, they very well could just argue that Office of Legal Counsel was wrong, right? I mean, that's the government. The government's sometimes wrong, right? And they would argue that two-step standard for whether currently accepted medical use is met. They can just say they got it wrong. But I just want to point out, there is not much that can be done there, right? I mean, that is something where arguably maybe Loper could apply, but like what the OLJ said there was not just that it was appropriate. It said that it struck them as it was actually a better standard. It was more appropriate than the other one. And so it's not just like, gee, they've managed to like thread the eye of the needle and then slip one by the goalie. I mean, this is just a very buttoned up and appropriate what at least the FDA has done.
So here's what I want to ask then, like, do you question the DEA's process and all this? Because from my understanding, it's just like once there is a ruling from the ALJ, the DEA makes the final decision. So a lot of people are going to start thinking, okay, this hearing's not going to take place until a new administration actually is in office. Now you're thinking, man, we really hope Kamala Harris does win this election for cannabis, you know, investors, and for that matter, the industry as a whole. But, you know, it's going to be extremely important to see who's going to be the new head of the DEA in event Donald Trump were to win the election. But how does that all work then? You've got ALJ, basically the judge making a ruling, but the DEA makes a final decision. Once that decision is then made, we could see actual litigation amongst some of the anti-groups.
We could. I'm not suggesting that we will, but I think we theoretically could. And as to your sort of political point,
like, could the DEA still, after a ruling, shut this down? I guess they could, couldn't they?
They have before, I think. I'm pretty sure
when you say shut this down, what do you mean?
Like not pass rescheduling.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, let's be clear here. The administrative law judge could hear the testimony, review the record, and recommend that cannabis. I mean, that he could recommend the cannabis be rescheduled to 2. He could still do that, right? Or 1. Or if there is precedent for this, the ALJ can recommend a rescheduling to 3, and the DEA administrator can reject that recommendation.
Yeah.
And in that case, the good guys might be on filing litigation afterward, right? Saying that there was no basis for that was arbitrary and capricious. And so, I mean, it could, and I don't mean just like within the metaphysical possibilities, but I mean, it could go in either of those directions still.
Wow. Hence the reason why the new head.
I think that it will, or that would be reasonable given the record. I mean, I think that would be, it's hard for me to fathom, given the record on currently accepted or commonly accepted medical use and the risk of abuse and harms, that the ALJ could reasonably find that cannabis should be scheduled more strictly than Schedule 3. And if the ALJ found that and recommended that, it would be very difficult for a administrator to reasonably do that. But let's say you have someone who is a real strict prohibitionist, and they still exist, and they're like, over my dead body, and they just don't care about the litigation. They're like, I'm not going to do this because at a minimum it'll delay 4 years with litigation. That is not going to happen under a Harris administration.
No.
There's no way that Vice President Harris, if President Harris would appoint someone as a DA administrator who would be that prohibitionist. I'm suggesting that it's at least within the realm of possibility that President Trump would.
You really do?
Certainly within the realm of possibility that if it's that sort of person, that person would follow that model that I just gave and be like, well, whatever, I'm not going to reschedule it, and there can be litigation and we'll fight, and at a minimum it won't be rescheduled for another few years.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be an optimist, but I can't help but think.
You feel like you need to with me. I'm normally an optimist.
Oh, no. I love what you're saying. It's realistic. I was just going to say, with the caveat of I hate to be an optimist, but in a Trump administration, if the DEA administrator is going to do that, I can't help but think that RFK would be sitting there saying, guys, this is going to get litigated. I've litigated these kind of things. Cannabis is an issue that should not be going through these motions. It's time to change. And granted, that's a lot of hyperbole, but at the same time, it's something that realistically could happen.
Yes, that realistically could happen. I mean, it seems to me if Trump gets elected and he and everyone around him do what they say they're going to do, in that situation, we could have RFK Jr. as a commissioner of FDA, basically tearing it apart. And by that point, the DOJ could be torn apart. I mean, there could be, like that's what has been expressed as an objective. And so, I just want to say that there could be delays based just on the friction around that.
Yeah.
Even the point of like, what happens if there's not a Trump has not put in place an administrator for the DEA. It just hasn't happened. They haven't bothered to do it.
That's a good
and they have an acting administrator there who does not want to. I mean, like, just someone who's an acting administrator is like, I'm just an acting administrator. Hell, if I'm going to be the defendant in a lawsuit going forward for the next 5 years of my life, right, and just not doing it.
Yeah.
And again, I think we're spending time on, it's kind of the 80-20, right? I mean, we're spending more time on the bad side. I think what's more likely to happen is, there'll be some proceeding, maybe, and the ALJ will recommend rescheduling, and hopefully we'll have a reasonable, sane administrator of the DA who will enter expeditiously as required by law, enter a final order.
You know what we need? We need an election to happen, and it can't come fast enough next Tuesday, because once we start to see some appointments, we can get some of these questions answered, and then it's onwards and upwards to figure out what happens next, right?
Yes. I can also say this. I mean, I think most of your U.S. audience will know this by following the news, but just in case, we are unlikely to know the result of the presidential election on election night.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't claim, I'm no Nate Silver or anything like that, but I study these polls and look at all the different ones, and I speak to folks on the ground, and it looks to me like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're all really super tight, and they're in litigation now, right? And that's going to continue, and it may take a little bit of time. And so I don't think that the election will be called that night, and how long it will take. I think sometime in the following days we'll have some indication and might have a feeling, but it'll then be additional days and perhaps weeks of litigating certain issues. So it's going to be a wild ride for a while, I think, and I think it'll be a while until we know who's going to fill these positions.
Yeah. Well, time will tell. Hopefully a week from today, we'll have a lot more clarity as to what's going on. There's one question I wanted to highlight before I let you go. Gretchen Gailey, who's actually a big follower and viewer of the show, and is definitely very well entrenched in the space and position lobbying for the space in Washington. But she writes, when there is a new administration in 2025, say the DEA has a new head, can they kill the hearing and say, my bad, we're no longer rescheduling, no need for a hearing?
Yes.
I, in so many ways, asked that question. I just wanted to see if that was kind of.
I think that could happen. I mean, that's fairly radical.
That's worst case scenario, pretty much.
I mean, I think that's fairly radical. That would happen because that sort of in and of itself exposes that administrator to some level of litigation risk. But I certainly think that's within the realm of legal possibilities.
Yeah. A couple other interesting comments. You don't have to comment this, but there's a fair comment. Is it fair to assume Ann Milgram should have sent this additional information with this list, as this information would have been sent to her from interested parties? Possible delay tactic? That's a lot of speculation. Who knows?
I don't think it's a delay tactic. I don't really know what happened there. I don't know that it has to be sent. I'm not sure, actually.
Okay.
I like that the judge is being thorough. I think that if it was a prohibitionist judge that wanted to make this look like a clown show, he would just let everybody in and we'd have a nice hearing that got absolutely nothing done and just slandered the industry.
Yeah.
After reading it and digesting what the announcement was yesterday, I'm happy with the steps that are being taken moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this: he is very experienced. Has been with the DOJ since 1995, and I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt until I see something that suggests otherwise.
Yeah.
That could be any number of things, including the selection of who will actually testify at the hearing.
Well, I think we look at Trump and, Gretchen, you have some points and you're going to know better than us, but I just think the advancement and the overall conversation of the industry has matured so much more. And it has, for obvious reasons, because that's what time does from 2016 to 2024. and you have both candidates basically speaking about cannabis now. And with that, when you have something like rescheduling put in play and there's a redactment of 250 pages, that's overwhelming amount of evidence, and you see the perception of Americans looking at this and talking about this more, I know it's a court of law, but I would think that that would have to have some sort of play at a certain point, regardless of what is the outcome or the ruling.
I'm a legal realist. I mean, everyone has their own points of view, and they're all valid. But I mean, I'm a legal realist, and I believe that these decisions are made by humans,
right?
And humans have all sorts of viewpoints, perspective, biases. And so even the result in Florida could have an impact, right?
Yep.
I mean, if Florida passes, it's big, it's enough states, the government, and the two have nothing to do with each other directly, but the government's feeling like this is inevitable. We need to push it in this direction. Keeping it as illegal doesn't make sense. If Florida doesn't pass, and let's say it doesn't come close to passing, like it's 55%, you know, lets the government say, well, maybe this is slowing down. Maybe it's, you know, if they don't want to do it, it gives them kind of a positive feedback loop to think that's okay to do. So I'm not saying that'll happen. I'm just saying, you know, there are humans that are influenced by the world around them when they make these decisions. And honestly, the best example of this in cannabis, and we all know it, is the opponent who comes around because his or her or their family member has a positive use of cannabis for a medical condition. And then all of a sudden they're advocates, they're warriors, right? And so people really are influenced, particularly on the subject, by the real world around them.
Yeah. Eric, always a pleasure catching up with you. I appreciate the clarity on behalf of Anthony and I and the entire community here today. This has been great feedback. Let's keep in touch and hopefully have you on in the next week or two after this election's done. We can have a further conversation as to what we can anticipate next now that we have something a little bit more concrete as to who's been appointed and what we can anticipate from there. But again, big thank you on behalf of everybody here, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to speak with you, and I wish you all a happy and a healthy weekend.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot to take in, but
it was the best explanation that anybody's given in the last 24 hours or 18 hours since news came out. And I think the color into the background of the judge was something that was very eye-opening. It's good to see that it's the chief ALJ as it relates to the DEA. So it's not going to be a clown show.
Yeah. Gretchen, I'm seeing a lot of your comments. And yeah, I understand like where you're going with this. You know, truthfully, at the end of the day, I agree with some stuff. I think there is some stuff that could be at play here, but you know, I'm not going to sit here and dispute as to like who knows Washington better. Like you obviously are there and you speak to a lot of people and see how things are done. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the DEA makes the final decision, right? You know, even after
Trump could put a DEA head in that kills this thing just as fast as Kamala puts one in that takes cannabis off the CSA or completely deschedules cannabis.
Yeah.
It can cut both ways. I mean, sure. Trump easily could do that. Hopefully he doesn't, because that would suck.
You know, it's a great comment here. Perfect guest. No need to read any more Twitter comments. There you go.
And that's why we had Eric on.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump into the wire. Head on to topic number 2 and another 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan's podcast. This time, Vice President JD Vance. Did you make it through the full 3 hours this time?
No, I've got a very hard time sitting down and watching or listening to a 3-hour podcast.
Did you make it to one at least?
About 45 minutes. 45? I like JD Vance. I've come around on it.
Very conversational.
I know we had our encounter with him in Washington, and my first response was, well, he's against cannabis, and he at least gave us about 5.5 minutes of his time while we were there. So that was enough. And I mean, the more and more he speaks and the more and more he comes out of his shell, the more and more I like the guy. He danced a little bit around the cannabis issue. He had strong opinions. I mean, do it in your privacy of your own home. Don't do it around my kids. Don't do it in public. You should probably have more tighter guardrails. as an industry, as per kids being exposed to cannabis, which anybody that's got an inside perspective on the cannabis industry, we take the appropriate steps to make sure that the substances can't get in the hands of children. Everything is in childproof packaging as a standard, unlike the alcohol industry or the cigarette industry, where they don't have that kind of things as best practices. He also said that psychedelics were interesting as it relates to veterans and PTSD. Didn't say anything to the contrary of prohibition. We're taking everything that he said at face value, but it seems like he is coming around on the issue as it relates to both cannabis and psychedelics.
Sounds to me, and I don't want to read too much into this, but it sounds to me that a lot of powers to be that are, let's say they do get appointed. I think the rescheduling and the medical research that's involved over the next 3 to 4 years is the proper step to get people's change on how the perception of this industry is. I think that's what we need to like focus on. And really, best case scenario, that would be the situation, because it still seems to me, yeah, Amendment 3 in Florida would be huge, but the overall perception, and if we get some sort of movement regarding legislation out of Washington, that's going to take a lot of pressure off. And I think that would be a huge win for the industry.
Yeah. The biggest thing the biggest win for the industry is the 280E goes away.
Right.
Finally. Not to talk from a financial incentive standpoint, but single-handedly, the biggest thing that Schedule 3 does is takes away 280E. 280E is asinine that these companies are operating within that realm. That being said, they should be the ones in court. On the contrary to the parties that are harmed by for the parties that could be harmed by rescheduling, maybe it should be that the cannabis companies are making their case as to how they've been harmed by it being in Schedule 1. And the continuous, just onerous nature of being in Schedule 1 that's not justified from the get-go. Maybe that's the conversation that we should be having. It's obviously a grass is greener statement and not reality, but it would be a more poignant conversation to have versus someone that can be harmed by Schedule 3, which there really isn't anybody that, in my opinion, can be harmed by Schedule 3, as it does nothing but increase medical research and do away with 280E.
Agreed. John Verville suggesting another 4 years of culture war. Geez, well, be prepared, my friend. First 100 days is going to be very, very busy. This is, as I said, Rob Seacrest the other day saying this is really a non-voter issue at this point. And there's a lot more important things, as we all know, when the new administration does take place. But I think rescheduling, this is the first step in the right direction. Are we going to get federal legalization the next 4 years? No, we're not. We need to see proper research first, and then whoever's appointed and there's momentum building. I don't want to get too far ahead because who knows? Will federal legalization happen if they're reelected in the second term? I have no idea. But the first thing
I don't see cannabis being on either's 100-day agenda.
No, of course it's not.
There's so much stuff to get done. Eric brings up a very good point, though. Trump has been saying the entire time that he's going to unleash RFK on the 3-letter agencies.
Yeah.
If there is some sort of stripping out of these 3-letter agencies, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the agencies, that could also impact the speed at, let's say, rescheduling gets done. Because if there's no DEA administrator to bring down the final ruling, we might just be sitting there for a while.
Yeah. Anna writes, you can buy psychedelics in Toronto. People walking around all effed up. Yes, they are. That is one city that has changed completely since COVID. I lived there for 20
conversation, though. I don't think psychedelics should be recreationally sold.
Absolutely not.
That's a line that I've said that I'm on the other side of.
That's all black market stuff.
I think psychedelics should be. Well, they're starting to make psychedelics legal in the States in certain jurisdictions via ballot initiatives. And I mean, I think that psychedelics should be studied as it relates to mental illness from a medical and a therapeutic perspective. But psychedelics from a recreational point of view, I don't think have any business in being sold for people to do recreationally.
Premier of Ontario, which is equivalent to a governor in a state, is Doug Ford. And I will say that, well, we all know his famous late brother, rest in peace, Rob Ford, and addiction battles that he suffered. But Doug Ford's been in office for the premier for I don't know how many years now, 5-6 years, and he got rid of the lottery system in Ontario. And as you and I discussed in the past, Anthony, there are a ton of dispensaries in cannabis, among other things that are popping up everywhere in that city.
Yeah, up and down King and Queen, there were mushroom dispensaries next to cannabis dispensaries.
I know.
It's ridiculous. I mean, yeah.
Surprises me in how he views this, knowing that, as Eric alluded to a couple of times, that anytime you see a member in Congress, a politician, a judge that's affected by a family member, that usually hits home. But it is what it is. Let's get a quick update before we bring on Dan for the chart guys on. But yes, on 3 from Florida. What are you seeing poll wise? Anything you want to share?
I see Kim. My hat's off to her. She's kicking ass and taking names. She's on the media circuit right now. She was on Laura Loomer, which is a friendly podcast towards Amendment 3. Obviously, she's a heavy Laura, not Kim. I don't know Kim's political affiliation, but Laura was heavily backing Trump. Laura has been driving the narrative around Amendment 3 and that Trump was backing Amendment 3, countering Christina Pashaw and Governor DeSantis. So Kim was on her show, I think, Wednesday. And then Kim also on Wednesday, or it might have been yesterday morning, was on, I think his name was Devin Steele or Derek Steele, big anti-Amendment 3 megaphone. She shut him down with facts and data. He looked very uncomfortable on his show as she shut everything down in its tracks.
Where can you find this?
It's all on Twitter. As it relates to home grow, as it relates to the immunity clause that's being peddled, as it relates to the monopoly, she shut everything down in real time on his show. It was actually great to see.
It's great.
Oh, DeSantis was on Ben Shapiro. DeSantis has been on I got to give the guy credit. He's been on Fox News every night. Wow. And he segues in with a larger topic that's relevant in the news. And then they go to Amendment 3 in Florida.
Yeah.
Every single time.
And Doug's brother Rob was smoking crack. Yes, aware of that. I'm just surprised in how he's viewing a lot of this stuff. Did I just say that? I don't know if YouTube's going to allow us to monetize this video after saying that, but it is what it is. But yeah, I actually worked at a television and radio station in Toronto, and those guys would come in every Thursdays to record their weekly show on our stations. And when they came in, it was a hurricane. Yeah.
And don't worry, Dr. Gordon, your messaging within the campaign is not going unnoticed. I see Dr. Gordon on all of the Yes on 3 ads on TV locally.
Yeah.
He's working close with the campaign.
Isn't it funny, though, when you present information, you almost get the same feeling that if there is an once the ALJ hearing and the participants that take place, they see the data that's presented and they start, talking this through. It's overwhelming information. The same thing as Kim being absolutely prepared regarding Amendment 3 and just shutting somebody down right then and there. And
correct. But you have to remember, with rescheduling, they're going to bring up a lot of information that's negative towards cannabis.
Yep.
Which is fine, but it has no bearing in this hearing.
Right.
Because the major argument here is, how is rescheduling going to harm you?
You said it best right there. You said it best.
It's accessibility. If rescheduling was to legalize cannabis and to make it more accessible to people, there'd be some very, very good arguments, strong arguments coming against it.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Well said.
That's why I'm actually very
all
curious.
The allegations, to your point, Eric said that. And when he said that, I'm like, you know what? You get so obsessed with this. You keep reading it so closely. And sometimes you stand a little too close to the trees to see the forest. But then you're reminded all these rebuttals and allegations these anti-groups are saying has nothing to do with rescheduling. Nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right, we got to get going. It's 49 minutes, and we're gonna look at the week on how it's performed as far as charts. Time to bring in Dan for the chart guys. Arns, cue the music, my friend. Well, look who's back. Finally got some internet service. So, before we get into all the charts and stuff like that and how we look for the week, but maybe walk us through. You got hit by which hurricane was it? Was Helen?
Yep.
And that was what? That's probably 5-6 weeks ago now?
Yeah, Western North Carolina. It was an absolute mess. Unfortunately, a bunch of people died. A bunch of people still don't have water. Power is making its way back towards most people, but yeah, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. And, the big takeaway was the community outpouring of support and love within each other.
That's great.
I look at Twitter and what people are saying, and it's just so far from reality into what's happening here. And it's so frustrating, but it's just so much information that it's hard to fathom. And you just have to give up and just, not try and convince people that aren't here that are giving these opinions about what's taking place.
You don't know the situation unless you walk in someone else's shoes. And that is a term that's been used since the beginning of time. But I've never been involved. I remember 2 years ago on Christmas Eve, we were involved in 75-mile-per-hour winds. And I thought it was like insanity as to how loud it was. But you're talking about twice the strength of that with a hurricane. I can't imagine going through something like that and the destruction that was involved.
Not even here. I mean, by the time it hit us, it was only, but 50 plus mile an hour, but it was because it was raining for days in advance that the trees were so soggy. They just fell right over. Wow.
Well, thoughts and prayers to obviously you and everybody that's down there, and nothing but up and up for you guys, to get through something like this. But yeah, what a challenging time it's been for you, but good to see you finally with some internet service. You were saying you got a generator that's being fueled up with gas every couple of hours down the street is how it's working right now.
That's how they're running internet in my local neighborhood. Yeah. And I got a wire across my driveway that I wrapped in some rugs so I can drive over it, but it works. I'm here.
Is that as an American? I don't know what is, but yeah, community getting around each other and supporting each other. But listen, as you can probably tell, we got a big U.S. election coming up next Tuesday. There's a lot of people that have been watching the Florida stocks because Amendment 3 obviously is on the horizon. We saw a little bit of a sell-off day earlier this week on the Tuesday, and since then, stocks have been relatively flat. So let's jump into that and what we're seeing here on a Friday morning and begin first with the biggest and largest ETF, MSOS. And what are we seeing right now and notable things that investors should be mindful of?
So just a couple words first. I want to tie in everything that you just talked about. I was in the back watching, very informative, to the trading and investing mindset. Just bridge the gap here. People need to have game plans for both best case and worst case scenario. And that's where people get into trouble. They let their emotions dictate their decisions. They don't even fathom the other side. I have so many people commenting on my content that's saying things like, Amendment 3 is 100% going to pass. And if that's your mindset, you're just asking to lose money. Maybe it's not on this specific thing, but you have to prepare for all these scenarios. And, for me, it seems unfathomable that the DEA could deny going to Schedule 3, as with most of you watching. But I also know the history of the DEA going back to 1930, not the DEA, but the government to 1930, and the process over the last 100 years with cannabis. And it wouldn't shock me in the slightest that the DEA just continues to be hypocritical as they have been for so long and just says, no, we're not doing this. And I have a game plan established for that. And so that's just extremely important that you weigh all scenarios so you're not blindsided.
Yeah. And I was actually having a conversation this morning that whatever you're doing in this space, and this is not investment advice, you want to look at the fundamentals of a company versus saying what's going to depend on what's happening in Washington with legalization, which is so accurate. So based off of that, let's look at the first chart, MSOS. How are you, preparing yourself leading into Tuesday and beyond pertaining to some of this stuff and really what you're seeing from a chart perspective?
Yeah, so I've been pretty transparent, just following my game plan, coming on here saying I sold everything heading into the summer, expecting the summer bleed, talking about looking to Florida at the end of the summer. So got back into True Leave, and then talking about, selling a solid amount of my position pre-vote, just because the play was for the run up into the vote, and the vote's a gamble. And so I'm not going to gamble my full position. I'm going to lock in profit. So for MSOS, we had a scenario where, okay, everybody that's going to buy before the election has done so. Maybe there was some leaks as far as this information known that maybe this process is going to be dragged out a little bit longer for Schedule 3. Whatever it is, we've been extremely weak for the last week plus, and it is solid bear volume. I mean, every day, aside from today, we closed at the low of the day the last 4 days in a row, and it's still on above average volume. We can't disregard that. We have to see what the chart is telling us and accept that information. I don't want it to be the case. I would rather it be going up. But the chart is giving us information and it is showing us weakness. I mean, MSOS yesterday hit the lowest level in 2.5+ months. And, you know, I would have no interest long in this sector, aside from the fact that the Florida charts were looking bullish. Everything else, I mean, MSOS, Curaleaf, GTBIF, the charts are not bullish. So I have to wait for the charts to shape up, showing me bullish uptrends to get interested. And, you know, MSOS right now, okay, today we finally put a stop to the bleeding for now. Okay, that's a start.
Okay.
But, you know, we can bounce 10% and set a daily lower high. So we know that a daily lower high is the most likely result of the next bounce that we see in this sector. The bounce is attempting to get going now. And again, if we just zoom out, you know, I hate to be so negative on this space, but I just have to continue keeping it real, where I just don't see productive things taking place for the bulls. You know, here we are in a sideways range that we've been trading within for 4 months, and there's nothing productive going on at this point. We had a nice bull break, and that was, okay, let's go. We finally got over this resistance. And if you do not hold that back test and see continuation, it's a red flag. As soon as you fall right back into that range, that's telling you, nope, that new price is not supported by buyers. And it was a quick move up, and we're right back to where we were. And that's a red flag. And for bears in this sector, time is their friend. The longer these things take to be drawn out, we know there's no volume on the OTC. We know the only way these sectors move is an influx in volume and new interest. And we just don't have that when things are long and drawn out. So we're looking for a daily lower high to be the result of the next bounce. And the question then would be, do we get a downtrend?
A lot of people holding their breath right now, I think, as to what's going to happen come Tuesday with this vote. But that's pretty much the pattern I'm seeing right across the board. And what's the next one we have up? Is it TrueLeaf?
Yeah, and I still have 60% of my position here. I sold 40% above 13, selling into strength, as I'm trained to do in this sector. We're building a base down at 1150. And we have earnings coming up as well, so a little bit of a double whammy. But I am going to gamble a bit and the only reason I'm going to gamble is because I have a good profit cushion from prior entries. So I will be holding a decent position into the vote. I do believe that, you know, if we get a positive vote, we're heading right back up to where we came from and potentially beyond, likely beyond. And if we get a negative vote, then we're heading right back down to single digits. And it's very, you know, black or white with regards to what we're going to get in terms of the outcome of this vote. But in the short term, it's just, you know, ping-ponging around between 1150 and 12 while we wait for the vote on Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, I was going to get into some of the other Florida players. I think it's pretty consistent as to what we're seeing right now. Maybe there's one more we want to bring up, but I know a lot of retail investors but Air Wellness, what are we seeing there?
So same thing as far as, you know, it's not game over. We gave back a lot. We're looking to establish a new base of support. And again, this previous resistance zone, we rejected 218, we rejected 222 on the way down, and now we're battling that level. We're trying to turn that level into support. And so we need to see these bulls get over, you know, 225, get a daily bounce going to back test and hold. Because again, you got to create these stair steps of an uptrend. Yeah. And if you can't back test and hold, you're not creating an uptrend. So again, same thing, you know, if we see a positive reaction, we're going 260 plus. If we see a negative reaction, back down to 170, 160. And I do expect we will get those results Tuesday night, not the general election, but Amendment 3 should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Next Wednesday morning is going to be telling, isn't it?
Yeah. And one other bullish chart is, you know, Guap loves HITI, and that is a bullish chart. Like, I can understand having long interest in a chart that looks like this because it's, you know, forming an uptrend and it's hitting highest levels in years last week. And that's productive. But again, you know, you look at the other major players, the weekly chart for GTBIF, it's just, there's no progress. We're just right back to where we were trading for 2 months. So it's the sector needs a catalyst. It needs a sexy headline. I did a live stream earlier this week and I wasn't intending to go down this road and everybody kept asking me questions. And so I just answered them honestly. And, you know, I came off sounding really bearish just for the longer term potential of this sector. And it's really just because of how long and drawn out things take. And, you know, I think that the positives in this sector are, you know, your name getting bought out by a big player eventually. Obviously, we need to get uplisted and have access to capital and things like that. But just be aware that it's a long, slow road. And if you're constantly frustrated, it means maybe you have too much money invested. But, you just have to accept what is being given to us and shown to us and expect it to continue for the most part until we get a catalyst for change, volume, new money interest.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Dan. I can't emphasize on that enough. It's challenges is that a lot of investors got spoiled from the early days. It was like a lot of publicity and press releases and stocks moving up 30% off of those with no real business foundation in place. And I still think there's a large and retail investor community involved in this space that's still waiting for those types of days when really, let's face it, America and the US and the way everything's built out there as far as cannabis is completely different from what Canada is. And it's going to take time. But we do have a catalyst moment, and I think people hang around for quite a long time, and they'll be watching this closely on Tuesday. So look forward to having you back on next Friday to see how things basically perform based off of Tuesday's news. But in the meantime, let's keep in touch. We'll check back in with you next Friday.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Dan. All right. We'll bring back in Mr. AV, Mr. Varel here on a Friday as well. I think that was pretty much... You agree with all that? There's a lot of unknowns right now as to what we are looking at until we get
everything in the sector
clarity.
right now is unknown.
Yeah. Okay, we're an hour and 5, or just a little over an hour. It's that time of the week again. It's the happiest time in the cannabis space. It's Fridays. It's Mic Drop with Guap. Let's bring him in.
Good afternoon.
Let's get that music going, Arns. Come on, buddy.
Greetings, Earthlings. I know it's been a few weeks. Got up to Virginia, did a lot of chainsawing and land clearing, plenty of lodge pull, bend, don't worry. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, great interview with Eric.
Was that good?
I mean, I was hoping we would get him on today.
We did.
As some out there may recognize, the tweets for the last month from the TDR account are coming from this guy. So give me any feedback. I'm definitely open to him, trying to work in the background and make this show better.
What, they're not coming from Shad, the Dales report?
So,
that's
yeah.
funny.
I mean, my head is definitely spinning with scenarios, but I like what Dan said about, just put a percentage chance on it, hope for the best, expect the worst, plan accordingly, invest accordingly. But I'm definitely with Eric on how a lot of folks, for good reason, are focusing on that 20% rather than the sort of likely scenario. So that's there's nothing sure in this world other than death, taxes, and politicians politicking. So,
you can't say that enough.
Right. But the one thing I'm interested in is how many of these participants actually get to go to the hearing. I know the scenario of 0 is been floated out there, but I could see a handful making the cut, like the AG of Nebraska is one of the interested parties. Did Village Farms grabbed my attention on that list too, right? Yeah, for considering that this is a hearing that's supposed to hear people who are negatively affected, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those people in support of cannabis perhaps don't get to even say a word, and the ones that can actually make the cut may be pretty small, if not 0. So we'll see. But it is impossible to predict. I've been saying for a while, let it all play out, because no one can tell you who's going to get elected, what the appointments are going to be, what ALJ is going to say. You're all sort of, anyone who says it's all priced in is not thinking about this the right way. No. I think we got a lot more scenarios to think about. Agreed. So I do want to spotlight a couple tweets of the week. We retweeted some stuff. Sabatino's satire machine continues. Definitely the Dales report against probably my better judgment. Do we have any screenshots of those tweets? We don't have any screenshots. Oh, we gotta bring that up. Orange, can you bring that up? It's a video Sabatino put out there. If we could play it, I would die laughing again. I mean, the guy's amazing. He has to write satire on his videos because he got into a bit of hot water with one that really caught fire. It was Biden talking to Schumer on the runway tarmac. So since then, he's had to put satire in all his tweets. That's well worth a watch. As is the transcript of Hirsch's explanation on Yes on 3 polling.
Yeah.
Someone took the time to transcribe that. That was from a space that Toby did with Anthony on there. That was, I think, one of the best explanations of empirical data and using that to actually not be so emotional about, oh, DeSantis said this, DeSantis said that. That's why prices went up, prices went down. Polling is polling, but at the same time, as the election gets closer, early votes pour in, the ability for a DeSantis to impact the vote dwindles as we get closer and closer to the election. Also, we may all be overestimating the power of politicians' ability to sway someone's personal stance on cannabis or anything else for that matter, because people tend to push off the candidate they don't like more than follow dogmatically anything a candidate says. Oh, Trump said I'm for cannabis, so I'm for cannabis now. I think it gives more politicians the ability to come out in favor. It gives them political cover, but it's not necessarily maybe influencing the people of California to vote yes.
Yeah.
All these ads make my head spin, make everyone's head spin, but at least, unlike all these other legislative...
Here's the takeaway, though, from what we said on Wednesday, though, right, Anthony? It's that as much as these ads, there's a lot of money being spent. I don't want to say they're not working, but the polls basically aren't really fluctuating all that much, are they, to your point, from 48 hours ago?
Right. Yeah. Anthony's on mute, but as Hirsch...
the way that Hirsch explained it, I mean, the polls haven't budged with DeSantis' rhetoric.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's not necessarily the politicians dictating how people feel. That can be something that's pretty well entrenched. But the great news, and I keep repeating this, is it's not up to an ALJ judge. It's not up to the DEA. It's not up to Trump or Kamala. It's up to the people of California to vote yes on 3 if they want to legalize cannabis.
Florida, you mean?
Implementation comes afterwards.
You meant Florida.
It's going to be hard, but
you meant Florida, right?
Yeah.
You said California.
Oh, I did. My bad.
Okay. I'm like, whoa, what are we doing here? What's moving now? Did I miss something?
Legalize cannabis in California, for God's sakes. It's about time.
I think the big takeaway here today is that all these anti-groups in cannabis that I learned from Eric, and then Anthony outlined it and put it perfectly later, was everybody's concerns about rescheduling has nothing to do with rescheduling. And all this money being spent by DeSantis about whether or not it's working or not, well, the polls are saying otherwise. So this is all part of a platform that we like to do every single week, is provide some education, some direction. So go home or log off here this weekend or today and enjoy the rest of your weekend and keep it real and keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
Call your grandparents in Florida and educate them real quick. We need their support too.
Good point. Good point.
Not that only grandparents live in Florida, Anthony. I'm just, if you're out of state and you got people in Florida, give them a call.
Bara, I loved your comment. Listen, you said don't need to listen to any more Twitter comments from earlier. That was great. Great show today. Thanks. A3 next up. Yes. Guys, we got a big week coming up next week. Want to give you guys all heads up. Sunday night, 8 p.m. We're doing a Twitter space. Myself, Anthony, are you available Sunday night? Or are you going to be tied up?
Sunday night? I'm not sure. And I'll be watching the Dolphin game.
Don Murphy's going to be joining us. Anthony Cogniglio. We'll have a few others on, just basically talking about what we can prep for as far as Tuesday night and things we need to watch. It's just kind of like further talking about our interview last week with Anthony Cogniglio. We want to bring in Don as well. So we'll be pushing out that link tomorrow morning. Make sure to log on Sunday night, 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. as well. After the election next Tuesday, we're going to have Don Murphy on to recap a few things. Hopefully we get some sort of direction and understanding as to who is the actual president going to be. But we'll find out at that point whether or not Amendment 3 has passed, some of the appointments that were announced. But Don Murphy is going to come on next Wednesday to recap things. And then Monday, as usual, we'll have Dan on, Dan Aarons. And we'll try to find another guest that we think would be beneficial heading into the election to provide some insight. But always a reminder, make sure to scan that QR code, subscribe to our Baked In newsletter, and leave some comments below on how well you think Guap is just making our Twitter account just blow right up. He's phenomenal.
and shout out to Fred G for dropping the $50 donation to the cause here. So
just saw that, Fred. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that. The dude abides. I'm wearing a dude shirt down here, so the dude abides.
Great. Shout out to Jungle Java too. Nicest person in the cannabis space, and always helpful. Gents, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you back here Monday. But get some rest. Got a busy week coming up with earnings and election season. It's going to be a big week coming up. Have a good weekend. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. What'd you all think the latest live stream? We are only weeks away from the big presidential election. Who's going to win? What kind of impact is it going to have on the cannabis space? We're going to know in a few weeks. So, as usual, we'd love to get your feedback. Leave lots of comments below. Make sure to smash that like button. Share this video with your network. And as usual, as I always say, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to our channel because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.